Welcome to all of our attendees at this year-end edition of Webinar Wednesday. You know, it goes without saying, and it almost sounds cliche to say that the year 2020 was an interesting year. It was certainly an interesting year for all of us. And so many people were touched in negative and difficult and challenging ways. And certainly people in many of your lives and people in my life have been touched in the worst of ways in some cases by the COVID-19 pandemic. But I am the perennial optimist. I just find it natural to try and find the positive in certain things. And I think as we look back on 2020, as difficult of a year as it was for so many, there are tremendous numbers of silver linings and tremendous things that we have learned in our lives across the globe, and certainly in the world of education and technical education as we struggled through this year of pandemic. So we're going to share with you today the 10 lessons that 2020 has taught us about education. In so many ways, we've innovated in the world of education and learned tremendous things in this year 2020. We're happy to share them in a top 10 list of sorts. Like any good top 10 list, we start with the number 10 and we work our way down to the number 1. So we share with you today the 10 lessons that 2020 taught us about education. Number 10, we learned that distance learning does not work for all, but it does work for many. As the pandemic began and as we looked at the spring semester and then rolled into the summer, we went and asked educators from all over the country how they delivered learning during the spring semester. You may recall that we offered and delivered these results in a webinar earlier this year. How did we deliver learning during the spring semester? 69% of educators used pre-recorded lectures, 58% used live lectures, 2 in 5 used instructor-led virtual demonstrations, and 23% of K-12 educators, only 23% of K-12 educators used virtual demonstrations in their programs. So the truth of the matter is that this distance learning model, as we learned, worked for many, many students. And as we also learned, it didn't work so well for other students. It was really a lesson in the fact that every single student learns differently. And some students excelled in a world of distance learning, and some students did not. Perhaps we already knew that, but we also learned that for many, many students, distance learning can be and is an effective method and an effective model for education. Number 9, the number 9 lesson that 2020 taught us about the world of education is that enrollment depends on in-person learning. And as much as distance learning can work for many, many people, we heard from especially community and technical colleges, that enrollment was down significantly as we rolled into the fall semester. In some cases, down by as much as 20%, 10 to 20% in almost every case of almost every community college that we talked to. Imagine being in a business and seeing your revenue or your customer base shrink by 20%. That was the challenge that many of our educators in the world of technical education were dealing with as we rolled into the fall semester. We believe and we hear from students that that is because, especially in programs such as advanced manufacturing, such as manufacturing-related disciplines, such as STEM-related disciplines, students thrive on those in-person interactions, and they thrive on being able to perform hands-on skills and learn in a hands-on environment. And when that opportunity in some cases was taken away from them, many of those students opted for other models in terms of continuing their career pathway or continuing their education pathway, as opposed to staying in or entering a career or technical college program. Number 8, the 8th lesson that 2020 taught us about education is that while enrollment depends on in-person learning and many students need to be in the lab, the truth is that the lab can be operated safely during a pandemic. Students in our technical education programs are used to rules. They're used to standardized operating procedures, the same types of procedures they will see when they get into the world of work. They are used to protective equipment, personal protective equipment like steel-toed shoes, like gloves and aprons and safety glasses and hearing protection. They are used to using these types of tools as they're working in and around equipment. Putting on a mask was just an extension of things that they were already used to doing. Following procedures like cleaning equipment and working carefully and washing their hands was an extension of things that they had already been learning and were already accustomed to doing. And so when it came to opening up our labs, we were able to do that across the country in a fashion that didn't look quite like the labs that we left in March when the pandemic came to the United States in a really big way, but in ways that enabled us to continue to deliver hands-on education nevertheless. So the number 8 thing that we learned was that we can operate our labs safely during a pandemic. Number 7 on our list of 10 lessons that 2020 taught us about education is that e-learning can and does work. Would you believe when we did that same survey last summer about how we delivered learning during the pandemic, 98% of respondents at K-12, at career and technical colleges, at community colleges, at our universities, 98% of respondents used some version, either free or purchased online content. E-learning can be an effective way to learn. And guess what? I am actually a product and I am evidence of that. As many of you know, our entire team went through Industry 4.0 training this summer using an e-learning platform to learn a whole variety of advanced manufacturing disciplines, from fluid power to programmable logic controllers to CNC machining, lean manufacturing, smart sensors and smart devices, all of these technologies. We learned them using an e-learning platform, and we earned the Smart Automation Certification Alliance Industry 4.0 certifications in basic and advanced operations. I know e-learning can work because I hear it from students. I know e-learning can work because I hear it from teachers and instructors. And I know that e-learning can work because I learned that way myself. And that, by the way, is coming from somebody, me, who is a hands-on kinesthetic learner and learns way better doing than sitting in a classroom. E-learning is advanced to a point where the interactivity and the realism of the skills that we're performing drive those lessons home, even to the most hands-on learners among us. So, number 7, e-learning can and does work. Number 6 on our list of 10 lessons is that the pandemic did not kill jobs in the markets that we serve. This is really, really important. As we see schools, as we see industrial employers making investments in industrial training across the country, the last thing that we want to see happen is for the demand for those positions to go away. We want to see manufacturing continue to grow. We want to see the manufacturing employment base and the advanced manufacturing employment base continue to grow here in the United States. And the truth of the matter is that in spite of the worst pandemic, the worst crisis of its kind in more than 100 years, demand for people in the disciplines that for which we train them is continuing to grow. Would you believe that in August, in the month of August of this year, at the height of the pandemic, manufacturing job openings, according to NAM in the United States, reached 460,000 openings. That was while the pandemic was going on. Of course, it continues. But in the month of August, there were 460,000 open jobs in manufacturing. The fact is that the pandemic did not kill jobs in manufacturing. And if anything, it created more opportunities in manufacturing and distribution and logistics and advanced manufacturing in all of these different markets that technical education serves. Number 5, we found more and more new ways to share best practices. Let's think about in the old days how we shared best practices in education. Maybe we went to a convention or we went to a conference and we sat in presentations and we went out on an exhibit floor and we met with people and we saw our colleagues and we listened to what they were doing. We listened to how they were innovating and we learned that way. Maybe we visited another college or another high school or another university and saw how that group of people, how those professionals were innovating their programs. That was how we shared best practices in the days pre-COVID. Well, we all know that those types of visits, that those conferences weren't exactly what they used to be. And we needed to find ways in an era where we were not able to get together person to person to continue to share information, to continue to share best practices, and to continue to learn from one another. Here at home, we use Webinar Wednesday as that platform. So the very discussion that we're having today is an example of how we innovated our business model to make sure that we could continue to share best practices with you, even though we couldn't be sitting in your conference room, standing in your lab, or seeing you at conferences. Another great example is the 120 instructors and teachers that we trained this summer in disciplines in Industry 4.0, showing them on a virtual platform how they can take the lessons of advanced manufacturing, they can take the lessons of the fourth industrial revolution back into their classrooms and inspire and train and teach their students in spite of the fact that maybe they weren't all in the same room, using the 7 elements of distance learning, showing individuals how we can continue to share those ideas with our students in spite of the fact that we're doing it in a completely different way. So we adopted ways in our business, and we saw our customers adopt ways in their operations to continue to share ideas with one another, to continue to share best practices through virtual tours, through virtual conferences, and through online learning, distance learning, webinars, virtual meetings, and so on. So the truth of the matter is that continuous improvement in education is still alive and well, in spite of the fact that we're not able to get together in the ways that we used to be able to do. The number 4 lesson that 2020 taught us about education is that lifelong learning is a necessity. The truth of the matter is that the pandemic caused disruption across the supply chain. It caused disruption across manufacturing. And in many cases, people were working in departments or working in areas that they hadn't before, just because of the way that demand changed so very, very quickly. And we learned very quickly that continuing to upskill, regardless of our age, regardless of our experience, is so very important. As technology advances, we can no longer leave whatever our education pathway is, high school, community college, university, get into the workforce and expect that that is the end of our learning. In many ways, that is just the beginning of our learning. And we learned that lifelong learning is an absolute necessity in a rapidly changing environment brought about in part by the recent pandemic. This is one of my favorite set of pictures that we have. As you can see, there's a gentleman on the left-hand side of the screen. His name is Dan. I'm not going to guess at Dan's age. We can see a gentleman on the right-hand side of the screen. His name is Brian. Nor am I going to guess at Brian's age. What I can tell you pretty sure, certainly, is that the difference between those two ages is a relatively big number. Brian has certainly been in the workforce quite a bit longer than Dan has. And in spite of that, there Brian is at his workstation, learning advanced manufacturing skills, continuing to upskill himself, continuing to sharpen his knowledge so that he remains relevant in the changing world of work. This year, in this pandemic, we learned and we underscored that lifelong learning is an absolute necessity. Number 3 on our list of 10 lessons we learned here in the year 2020 is that we need to and we can quickly deliver job-ready, on-demand skills. One of our guests here on Webinar Wednesday a month or two ago was a gentleman by the name of Mark Goodman. Mark talked about people porting over from sectors of our economy that were struggling, sectors like retail, sectors like hospitality, and moving into those sectors that were growing, sectors like advanced manufacturing, sectors like distribution, logistics, and supply chain. And the truth of the matter is that we need to be able to quickly provide people the entry-level skills and competencies that they need so that they can add value in the workforce on day one. And our community colleges, our technical colleges, our workforce boards, educators all over the country found ways to do that. Here's just one example of a boot camp, a 21-week boot camp that was held to upskill people quickly in the world of CNC machining, sponsored by the rock band Metallica, and that took place actually at Gateway Technical College. Just one example of boot camps that happened all over the country as we find ways to take people who were adding value in other sectors of the economy and move them into advanced manufacturing, distribution, supply chain, and logistics. The truth of the matter is that we can and we do deliver job-ready, on-demand skills. There are ways to get people the skills and competencies they need to add value in other sectors of the economy and do it quickly. And we learned that here in 2020. The number two lesson that 2020 taught us about education is that education can adapt quickly. I came from the world of industry. I like to tell stories about coming up with an idea, implementing it on Monday, implementing it on Wednesday, and seeing the results of that idea on Friday. 5 years ago, I moved over into the education sector, and I think we all know that change doesn't happen quite that quickly in education. And it's for a whole variety of reasons. And some of the reasons is that we need to validate and make sure that the changes we're making are proven and that they will be effective. So education historically has taken a while to evolve. I don't think I insult anybody by saying that. But we have proven this year that education can adapt quickly. I have a very good friend who's a provost of a major Midwestern university. And as he and I were talking about this summer, this was his quote that I wrote down. He said, "The current crisis accelerated innovation in higher education by at least 10 years. We found ways to leverage technology and deliver learning that we never would have found we never would have tried had we not been forced to do it. So, given the fact that we were in this pandemic, that we had to find new ways to deliver learning, we found those ways. We found ways to innovate. It wasn't always pretty. It didn't always work perfectly, but we were willing to try. We were willing to readjust. We were willing to adapt. And in the end, we are coming up with even better ways in many ways to educate our young people and people of all ages. The truth of the matter is that in 2020, we learned that when forced to, when necessity requires it, education can adapt extremely quickly. And congratulations to our educators who managed to do that. On that topic, and as a segue, our number one lesson that 2020 taught us about education is that tech ed teachers are truly heroes. As we got out and started working with tech ed teachers at every level, from high school teachers, from middle school teachers, to community and technical college teachers, to engineering professors in the world of universities and four-year education institutions, what we found was that they were by and large excited to get back into the classroom, excited to find ways to work safely, excited to get back into their labs. And in many cases, they were willing to take a little bit of a risk to continue to provide education opportunities to their students. They were able to find ways to deliver learning opportunities virtually. They were able to find ways to give demonstrations virtually, to provide hands-on opportunities for their students in a virtual environment, to try new things. And yes, to get back into the school, to get back into the lab, so those hands-on kinesthetic learners are able to continue learning. As we look at these photographs here, this was from our Thanksgiving special on Webinar Wednesday. Many of these people shared things that they were thankful for over the course of 2020. And I can tell you unequivocally that one of the things that we are absolutely most thankful for was the bravery and the passion and the commitment of the teachers and the educators in the world of technical education. So there you have it, the 10 lessons that 2020 taught us about education, from the fact that distance learning doesn't work for all, but it works for many, and to the fact that our tech ed teachers are our heroes, and everything in between. 2020 has been an amazing year. It's been a year of challenge, but it's been a year of innovation, advancement, and learning, certainly for the team here at ATS Lab Midwest, and I think for so many of our customers. So as we say goodbye to this year 2020, I can tell you that I am tremendously optimistic about the year 2021. We will continue to see innovations. We will take these lessons that we learned from 2020 and we will put them to work in 2021. Good Lord willing, this pandemic will be behind us soon. We will be getting back to some version of normal, but mark my words, that will not be the old version of normal. That will be a new, better, more advanced, more innovative version of normal, and we will have the disruption from 2020 to thank for that. So Happy New Year, everyone. We look forward to seeing you again next year here on Webinar Wednesday.